3 years ago, my boyfriend and I, as planned for 5 years, turned 30, sold everything we owned, including my car, took his Trailblazer, and decided to travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers, as we tend to chase good weather, find a state park, and backcountry hike into the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we are anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off the grid, but between the two of us, we have one prepaid phone, used for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook, which I use for work. I'm a freelance writer/content creator and am on retainer with a robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our living situation is to live debt-free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 1 to 2 times a week, we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. This background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us is involved in social media, and we know very little about Reddit or Instagram or use any apps. Because our phone isn't a smartphone, we don't even text. Last summer, we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states you don't ever really hear about other hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscape, and it does. The rules at this particular park were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit, there were a few basic laws/guidelines, but there was no check-in needed. We had all the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike, 3 in, 3 out. The whole time we were out there, we didn't see or hear another soul. But on day 1, as we were prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot as it was getting near dusk, half a mile off trail is usually the standard for us. We took what looked like kind of an animal trail, and about half a mile out, we saw a green, 2-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage, so we came upon it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the more social type. We've had some great experiences camping near other backpackers, sharing stories, food, and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent. It was zipped closed, so my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed green tent guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered, so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped. Never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgetting about green tent guy until nearing the end of day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off the trail when we came upon the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we really weren't expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again and nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out, saying, "It's weird, and maybe someone is hurt." I didn't like the idea from the get-go, because even though we hadn't had any bad experiences personally, we'd heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But, my boyfriend assured me we'd be fine, and if all else fails, offer him some weed to keep the peace. And we'd go on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend has been hailing his greeting over the last 20 yards, and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, "What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before and don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure we were going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. What we found was worse than that. Outside the tent were a dead doe's legs, all 4 of them, covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut most of the way and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus/vagina was covered in dried blood and agape. Like something had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent down at a scary broken-looking angle. The tent was open, so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have anyway, because at this point, the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringed kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, "What the F?" and we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could go until dusk was fully on us, and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail, and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just sat up whispering to each other, going over and over what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. It was like our brains were on red alert. I kept thinking any moment a dead deer trappist would come back to his tent, see our footprints or something, know we were there and track us back to our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn, we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy around our age, and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down, and my boyfriend showed him on a map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point, we hadn't even thought about it. We just assumed it had been shot, but because of the blanket, we didn't see a wound, but we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out to other campsites and have never approached another unmanned tent again.
I once met up with an old friend of mine, M22, a friend I had known for a few years prior to the meetup in November 2017. I had actually met this person on a dating site, however, as time went on, the relationship between us became strictly platonic. There were no red flags, my gut did not warn me, so I completely trusted this person. We met up in town, behind a bus station, on a grassy hill surrounded by trees and a tall wall. Our meeting was just to have a smoke, get a little high, and to have a small catch-up. The meetup was fine. I had actually started smoking weed a few months before, so I was still relatively new to it. He had brought something new for me to try, purple haze. I wasn't at all anxious about trying it, as I completely trusted this person and would never believe that he would lie to me. He had packed a full blunt for me, but I only managed to smoke a quarter of the blunt. We spoke during this time about work, our previous relationships, and random stuff. About half an hour later, I started to feel extremely lightheaded and anxious. I suddenly had this strange feeling where I did not feel comfortable at all, and I really wanted to go home. When I asked him if I could go home, he offered to take me home, but I said, "No, it's okay." He offered again, "Please let me take you home, you'll be safe with me." "I wouldn't hurt you," I shook my head and said. "No, thank you. I can take myself home." When I started to walk away, I felt like I was walking on a cloud, my head became dizzy, and my eyesight was a little blurry. I had never felt like this before, and in time, I started to panic. When we made our way down the hill toward the bus station, I was relieved, as there were a lot of people around, so if anything happened, someone would step in. I became extremely terrified of him. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that told me to get away from him, and when I got to the bus station, I told him I would call my taxi here and go home. His tone was no longer nice but very stern. "I'm gonna take you home now," and he began to pull at my jacket. I told him no, and that I was going home on my own. He pulled my jacket harder, and I fell against him. He pulled me into him and told me I didn't need to be scared of him, but I was so terrified. At this point, I started to feel very paranoid, and I couldn't see properly. I pushed him away from me, rubbed my eyes, and called for a taxi. He tried to pull my phone from me and yelled in my face, "Do you ever listen?" I'm taking you home." I noticed a few people had stopped and asked if I was okay. All I remember was that I wanted to go home. So, a lady kindly called a taxi for me and waited with me. Made sure I was okay and helped me into the taxi. During the time when I waited for the taxi, he kept trying to get me to come to his car with him, but the lady that looked after me told him to go home and that she was going to take me home instead. So, he left. When I got home, I gave the taxi driver money and told him to keep the change. I didn't want to wait around, I just wanted to get into my bed because at that time, it was the only place I would feel and be safe from harm. That evening, I lay in my bed for 5 hours straight, staring at the ceiling. I don't remember if I thought about anything or if my mum came in at any time. I just remember lying in bed doing nothing until the paranoia and the sickly feeling began to wear off. I remember looking at my phone and seeing I had 32 missed calls from him, 10 voicemails left, and 50 messages. The messages were weird. He had sent around 20 messages just asking where I was and when I got home. And in one of the voicemails, he had told me how he had this fantasy of taking me home while drugged up and tying me up. He wanted to blindfold me, and he wanted me to submit myself to him. I freaked out and blocked him on all social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, and I blocked his number. Before the blocking, I told him if he ever contacted me again, then I would call the police. I heard nothing from him for a month until I received a text from an unknown number, asking me how I was. I hadn't given my number to anyone, so I ignored it. I then received another message a few minutes later saying they missed me and that they would see me soon. I asked who they were. No reply. Nothing. So, creepy person who pretended to be my friend, let's never meet again. I've spoken to some friends regarding my story, and all of them have explained that weed would never make anyone feel this way, and a lot of them think I was given spice, not weed. Spice looks a lot like weed, but the effects are a lot stronger and more dangerous.
I go to school in a big city that is one of the least safe cities in the US. I chose this school for nursing and definitely not for the location. I live in a row house, that's what we call it, off campus, with 4 other girls. Cheaper and nicer than dorms, or so we thought. I guess you get what you pay for. We are all girls and sophomores in college. As you would guess, we go out and drink, come back, do things we don't remember. We had just started our rent in August. 3 floors, plus a basement which was padlocked by the owners. Understandable, we would definitely have parties down there to avoid immediate cleanup. The house was great, an amazing location to the school and work. I am a CNA who works odd hours, important for later. It was not expensive, and in good condition. I had never lived with that many people before, just one roommate, so before we definitely knew if one of us had misplaced or changed something, I started to notice my snacks were either half gone or completely gone. I was getting annoyed, but in a house of many people, it's too much work to go figure out who ate what, so I ignored it. Slowly, as girls do, we started making comments about someone eating our food, but passive-aggressively, you know, college girls. We all just let it go, because who wants a whole house fight? I work until about 11 in the NICU, get home at about 11:30, mostly on weeknights. I started to notice pans left out or snack wrappers around. I thought it was odd because none of my roommates had done that before, but just thought, oh, they probably drank a bottle of wine then went to bed and forgot about all this. Again, my roommates started making comments. This time we started to ask, because it was getting annoying, all our food being gone and things being left. I knew it was one of them, but who wants to admit they ate someone else's snacks in college? Snacks are a high commodity. We chalked it up to the girl who always smokes and eats her weight in food. She swore it wasn't her. This went on for about 2 months. It got more obvious someone was clearly taking everyone's food. Definitely the girl that always smokes. I see her eat her whole snack pantry in a night. I wish it was her. One night at work, I was about to get off, but a situation happened and I didn't end up leaving until 12:30. I took the bus home. I carry pepper spray, taser, and pocket knife, don't worry. I got home and was about to collapse. I wanted to go to bed ASAP. I walked in the front door, and the stairs are directly in front of you. You can also see down the side into the kitchen. I walked in and saw someone in the kitchen, but was way too tired to say hi, thinking it could end in like a 30-minute conversation about nothing. So I went straight upstairs. When I got to the second floor, I noticed all my roommates' doors were closed, which always means they are all either in their room for the night or asleep. I got a weird feeling, just something that made it click. They were all asleep, right? I texted our house group chat asking if anyone was in the kitchen. I felt stupid for even asking. 2 responded no, and they said the other 2 had been asleep. I knew it wasn't any of my roommates down there at that moment. I dialed 911, but didn't press call. I crept into my roommate's room across the hall. Thankfully, or maybe not thankfully, she didn't have her door locked. I whispered, telling her I think someone is in the house. She gave me the widest eyes ever and almost looked like she was going to cry. She didn't suspect anything like I had, but for reference, a very bad area, as in there was a shooting in the house 2 doors down only weeks earlier by an intruder, she mouthed to make the call. The whole time we were dead silent, we didn't hear really anything at all. I was starting to think I was seeing things after such a long day at work and was regretting that I dialed, thinking I'm going to look like an idiot when they show up, and I was just overtired and dreaming. We explain what's going on, and they said they will send someone ASAP. And that actually does mean right away, since it is a big and dangerous city. The police showed up and I didn't even want to go downstairs, but the operator confirmed it was them, so I did. But the whole time I could swear the operator could hear my heart beating. The police come in and look around. I'm thinking, oh God, I look so dumb. They ask if there are any other floors. We tell them technically the basement, but it's padlocked, so really no. They checked the basement just in case, and well, yeah, they were right. A man had been living in the padlocked basement. The lock was pulled off the hinges and just kind of propped against the wall. We never looked at that though. We rarely went out back. The guy had taken a comforter of one of my roommates out of the hall closet, had a mattress from God knows where, and his clothes? Well, he was the one moving and eating all of our stuff. He would come out in the middle of the night and do it. He started getting more comfortable. I don't know if he was drugged out and forgot to clean his tracks or if he didn't really care. Me and my roommates have pretty consistent schedules during the week. Probably letting him think that any time after about 12 was good to come out. We never slept with our individual doors locked, and that's what freaks me out most. He had access to any one of us at any moment, and we had no idea. When he was getting arrested, I was the only one to go down and look. I don't know why I did. I wish I didn't. So yeah, let's never actually meet, dude.